The Master of Words, an introduction to Jesus' teaching. When you think of great teachers throughout history, names of scholars, philosophers, and leaders come to mind. But there is one teacher whose words have transcended centuries, whose lessons still ripple through lives, and whose style of teaching was unlike any other. That teacher is Jesus of Nazareth, not a mere lecturer, not a conventional instructor. Jesus had a unique way of speaking that drew people in, held their attention, and changed the way they thought about life, morality, and God. Jesus didn't rely on long speeches filled with complicated philosophy. He spoke in parables, simple stories with deep meanings. Stories that painted pictures in the minds of listeners. A farmer sowing seeds, a shepherd searching for one lost sheep, a prodigal son returning home. These images were relatable, easy to remember, yet packed with wisdom. This storytelling style made his lessons timeless because people could see themselves in the narrative. But it wasn't just the stories. It was how he said them. His words carried authority, not the authority of force or fear, but of truth, compassion, and insight. Even those who disagreed with him were captivated. Crowds followed him not just for miracles, but because every sentence he spoke felt purposeful, alive, and charged with meaning. Every question he asked, every metaphor he used, was designed to make people think, to challenge them, and to spark reflection in their hearts. Jesus also had a way of speaking directly to the human experience. He acknowledged struggles, fears, hopes, and desires. He never spoke in abstract terms only. He spoke about things people could feel, see, and understand. And yet, his words reached beyond the everyday, pointing to something higher, a moral compass, a divine perspective. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Jesus as a teacher was his ability to balance clarity and mystery. He could make a profound truth seem simple enough for a child to grasp, yet deep enough to challenge the wisest scholars. That is the hallmark of a master teacher when words are not just heard, but internalized, lived, and remembered for generations. In this series, we'll explore the various dimensions of Jesus teaching, the stories, the questions, the wisdom, and the authority in his words. We'll uncover why his style was so effective and how his words still teach us today in ways that are practical, emotional, and transformative. By the end of this journey, you'll see not just a historical figure, but a teacher whose voice echoes even now, guiding hearts and minds toward truth. Speaking in stories, the power of parables. One of the most remarkable aspects of Jesus as a teacher was his mastery of storytelling. Unlike modern lectures, which often rely on facts, charts, or complex explanations, Jesus spoke in parables, short, vivid stories that carried profound spiritual truths. And here's the fascinating part. He never over-explained. He trusted that his listeners, if willing, would see the meaning for themselves. Take the parable of the Good Samaritan, for example. A man is beaten and left for dead on the roadside. Two respected figures pass by without helping. Then a Samaritan, a person considered an outsider and even despised, stops, tends to the man, and ensures his recovery. On the surface, it's a simple story about kindness, but at its core, it challenges social norms, religious prejudices, and human assumptions about who deserves compassion. That's the genius of Jesus' teaching style. Parables had several layers. They were memorable because they were simple, yet their meanings were deep and often counterintuitive. People could discuss them, debate them, and slowly uncover their truths over time. Unlike direct commands that could be ignored or misunderstood, these stories required engagement. They provoked thought, stirred emotions, and nudged people toward reflection. Jesus also used imagery that was familiar to his audience: seeds, vineyards, shepherds, lost coins. By connecting spiritual lessons to everyday life, he made the abstract tangible. This approach ensured that his teachings were not just understood intellectually, but felt emotionally. It created a bridge between the seen world and unseen truths, between ordinary life and eternal lessons. Another key point: his parables often challenged listeners to look inward. They weren't meant to simply entertain. They were meant to transform. They exposed hypocrisy, encouraged humility, and revealed the character of God's kingdom. A story might seem gentle, almost playful, but underneath, it carried a mirror to the soul, inviting self-examination and growth. In the art of teaching, engagement is everything. Facts fade, rules are forgotten, but a story, a picture in the mind, a moment of recognition, these endure. Jesus understood this better than anyone. His parables were like seeds planted in hearts, growing over time into wisdom, compassion, and understanding. Questions that stir the soul. Jesus' method of inquiry. Jesus didn't just teach through stories. He taught through questions, and not just any questions, questions that made people pause, think, and confront their own hearts. Unlike many teachers who simply provide answers, Jesus knew the power of curiosity. A well-placed question could challenge assumptions, reveal truths, and spark transformation. Consider the moment he asked, "Who do you say I am?" to his disciples. It wasn't a casual inquiry, it was a question designed to make them reflect on their understanding, their beliefs, and their personal experiences. It invited introspection. Who we are, what we believe, and how we respond to life's greatest questions. These are things no one else can answer for us. Jesus knew this. His questions often exposed deeper truths. When he asked the rich young man, "Why do you call me good?" he wasn't trying to dismiss him. He was pointing the man toward a higher awareness, prompting him to consider the source of goodness itself. Jesus' questions were never random, they were precise, purposeful, and transformative. What made this approach so powerful was how it engaged the listener actively. People couldn't remain passive. They had to think, to wrestle with their own convictions, to examine their hearts. This is a teaching style that works across time and culture because it turns learning into an experience, not just a lecture. Another remarkable element was how his questions often turned conventional wisdom on its head. Who is my neighbor? Or which of these three was a neighbor to the man? These questions force people to rethink assumptions, challenge prejudices, and redefine values. Jesus' questions weren't just about information, they were about transformation. Moreover, questions create dialogue. Instead of dictating, Jesus invited reflection. He sparked conversation, encouraged self-discovery, and empowered people to arrive at insights themselves. In this, he showed that true learning isn't about memorizing answers, it's about awakening, understanding. By teaching through inquiry, Jesus ensured his lessons weren't fleeting. They became internalized, debated, and lived. Every question was a key unlocking deeper wisdom. Every pause an opportunity for growth. Authority without force, the power behind his words. One of the most striking aspects of Jesus as a teacher was the authority in his voice. He didn't need loudspeakers, dramatic gestures, or intimidation to command attention. When he spoke, people listened not because they had to, but because something in his words carried weight, clarity, and truth. Unlike religious leaders of his time, who often relied on tradition or interpretation of the law, Jesus spoke with a confidence that was immediate and undeniable. You have heard it said, but I tell you, with just a few words. He refrained understanding, challenged assumptions, and revealed deeper truths. His authority wasn't authoritarian. It was rooted in insight, compassion, and moral clarity. What made this authority so compelling was authenticity. Jesus didn't speak for applause or recognition. His words aligned perfectly with his actions, creating a harmony between teaching and living. People sensed it. They didn't just hear his words, they felt them. The power of his speech was not in volume, but in integrity. Jesus also had a way of making complex spiritual truths simple yet profound. When he taught about forgiveness, humility, or love, his words were easy to remember, but hard to ignore. Every sentence carried intention. Every phrase stirred reflection. And because his words were rooted in universal truths, they transcended culture, time, and circumstance. Even those who opposed him acknowledged this authority. His opponents were often amazed at the clarity and boldness of his teachings. There was a certainty in his words, a precision that could cut through confusion and reach the heart directly. It was a rare combination, gentleness paired with unwavering conviction. Another key aspect was his courage, speaking truth to power, challenging the norms of society, calling out hypocrisy. He did all of this without fear. That courage gave his words an extra dimension of authority. People knew he meant what he said, and more importantly, they could trust that his words were anchored in purpose and truth. Jesus' teaching demonstrates that true authority isn't about dominance. It's about clarity, authenticity, and integrity. It's the ability to inspire, challenge, and guide without coercion. His words commanded attention because they were aligned with truth, lived experience, and divine insight. Teaching to the heart, the emotional connection of Jesus' words. What made Jesus' teaching unforgettable wasn't just his stories, his questions, or his authority. It was his ability to speak directly to the human heart. He didn't just communicate ideas. He reached emotions, stirred empathy, and touched souls in ways that transformed lives. Jesus understood people deeply. He recognized their fears, their struggles, their hopes, and their doubts. When he spoke of a shepherd searching for one lost sheep, or a father joyfully welcoming back a prodigal son, his listeners didn't just grasp the meaning, they felt it. His lessons weren't abstract. They were lived experiences painted in words that resonated with real life. He also used compassion as a teaching tool. When he healed the sick, comforted the grieving, or embraced children, His actions amplified his words. Every lesson carried emotional weight because it was backed by genuine empathy. People didn't just listen, they felt seen, understood, and valued. That emotional connection made his teachings stick. Another remarkable aspect was his ability to challenge while loving. Jesus could confront hypocrisy, question assumptions, and expose sin. Yet he did so with a tone that encouraged growth rather than fear. This balance of honesty and care created a space where people could reflect without shutting down. His words invited transformation, not condemnation. Jesus also knew the power of presence in teaching. He spoke to individuals and crowds, yet each person felt the message was meant for them. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. That promise was universal, but also intimate. It created a connection that transcended words alone. His emotional intelligence as a teacher allowed him to meet people where they were. He didn't simply preach ideals. He addressed hearts, joy, sorrow, hope, regret. Love, all were woven into his lessons. This is why his teachings are still relevant today. They speak not just to the mind, but to the human experience itself. In understanding Jesus as a teacher, we see that intellect alone cannot transform. Words that touch the heart, that inspire empathy, and that connect deeply to human experience are what create lasting impact. His teaching was a dialogue with the soul, a conversation that continues centuries later. Simple words, lasting lessons, the art of repetition. One of the quiet powers behind Jesus' teaching was his mastery of simplicity and repetition. He didn't overwhelm people with complicated theories or abstract philosophies. Instead, he used simple language, short sentences, and recurring themes to make his lessons clear, memorable, and practical for everyday life. Think about the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Each statement is brief, yet profound. Repetition helped these lessons sink into the minds and hearts of his listeners. By revisiting core ideas in different stories, parables, and teachings, Jesus ensured that his truths were not easily forgotten. This method also allowed people to see the same principle from multiple angles, deepening understanding and internalization. Repetition also created rhythm and familiarity, hearing the same truths again and again, in varied contexts, allowed his audience to reflect, internalize, and apply them. It wasn't just hearing, it was experiencing. The human mind remembers patterns, and Jesus' teaching style leveraged that naturally. Another key point: simplicity was never simplistic. Each statement or story was accessible yet layered with meaning. A child could grasp the surface, while a scholar could discover deeper wisdom. This made his teachings universal, able to reach people across social, educational, and cultural boundaries. Jesus also used everyday examples repeatedly: shepherds, seeds, lamps, vineyards, coins. These familiar images acted as anchors, helping listeners connect abstract spiritual truths to concrete realities in their lives. The combination of simplicity and repetition created lessons that were not just intellectually understood, but practically applicable and emotionally resonant. Furthermore, repetition reinforced values and behaviors. By consistently emphasizing love, forgiveness, humility, and compassion, Jesus wasn't just teaching concepts, he was shaping character. Over time, these repeated lessons formed a moral compass that guided decisions, actions, and relationships. This approach shows a timeless principle of teaching. Clarity plus consistency equals transformation. Words that are simple, repeated, and reinforced create habits of thought and life. Jesus' mastery of this principle ensured that his teachings were not fleeting impressions, but enduring guides for living with purpose, integrity, and love. Challenging yet uplifting, inspiring change without fear. Jesus had a rare gift as a teacher, the ability to challenge people deeply while simultaneously inspiring hope. He never shied away from confronting hard truths. At the same time, his words never crushed the spirit, they lifted it. That balance is what made his teaching transformative and timeless. Consider how he addressed sin, hypocrisy, and moral failure. He didn't sugarcoat reality. To the Pharisees and self-righteous leaders, he said, "Woe to you," direct, uncompromising, and provocative. Yet when speaking to sinners, the marginalized or the lost, his tone was gentle, inviting, and full of mercy. Go and sin no more, a command, yes, but also a promise of forgiveness and a path forward. His words simultaneously revealed truth and offered hope. Jesus also challenged social norms and assumptions. He confronted prejudice, questioned traditions, and disrupted comfort zones. Yet he did it in a way that drew people in, not pushed them away. His lessons often encouraged self-reflection rather than defensiveness. He motivated change by awakening awareness rather than by instilling guilt or fear. This teaching method empowered people. They felt responsible for their choices, yet supported by guidance and encouragement. Each lesson carried both challenge and opportunity, a mirror to see where one had gone wrong, and a doorway to act differently. The result was not shame, but transformation. Another aspect was how Jesus combined challenge with practical guidance. When he said, "Take up your cross and follow me," he acknowledged the difficulty of discipleship, while offering a path of purpose, meaning, and reward. His words didn't leave listeners paralyzed, they motivated action. His approach shows that the most effective teaching doesn't rely on fear. It relies on clarity, honesty, and the careful balance of truth with encouragement. People respond not to condemnation, but to inspiration, to the possibility of becoming better versions of themselves. Jesus' words carried this principle effortlessly. In this way, Jesus taught courage, resilience, and moral strength. His listeners were challenged to rise above comfort, selfishness, and fear, yet they were never abandoned emotionally or spiritually. Each word invited both introspection and hope. Lessons in contrast, light and shadow in Jesus' words. One of the most powerful techniques in Jesus' teaching was his use of contrast. He painted vivid pictures of choices, consequences, and the moral paths people could take. By showing the stark difference between righteousness and folly, light and darkness, obedience and neglect, he made abstract principles concrete, memorable, and compelling. Take, for example, the parable of the wise and foolish builders. One builds his house on rock, enduring storms and floods. The other builds on sand, and everything collapses. Simple, clear imagery, but the contrast drives the lesson home. It's not just advice, it's a call to deliberate choice, a visual and emotional imprint that lingers long after the story ends. Jesus frequently contrasted attitudes and behaviors to highlight deeper truths. He spoke of the rich and the poor, the humble and the proud, the forgiving and the unforgiving. These contrasts weren't meant to shame, but to reveal reality, making people aware of the consequences of their choices. By seeing both paths, listeners could evaluate their own lives, reflect on their values, and aspire to better decisions. This method worked because the human mind is wired to notice differences. Contrasts create tension, curiosity, and reflection. Jesus' teaching leveraged this naturally. He didn't just tell people what to do. He showed them what would happen if they chose differently. The lessons were felt as much as understood. Contrast also added drama and engagement. His statements like, "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it," or "it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God," grab attention, provoke thought, and linger in memory. The tension in the words draws the listener into active reflection. Beyond engagement, these contrasts encouraged moral discernment. Jesus didn't give vague instructions. He offered clarity. By juxtaposing the paths, he enabled people to weigh their actions, attitudes, and intentions carefully. His teaching wasn't abstract theory, it was a moral map, a guide for living with wisdom, integrity, and purpose. The power of pause, silence as a teaching tool. One of the subtler yet most profound aspects of Jesus' teaching was his use of silence. In a world filled with noise, chatter, and constant instruction, Jesus knew the value of pause, of letting words breathe, of giving space for reflection, and of allowing lessons to take root in the heart. Consider the moments when crowds pressed in, seeking miracles, guidance, or answers. Jesus didn't always rush to speak. Sometimes he asked a question and waited. Sometimes he observed quietly before responding. These pauses were not empty. They were deliberate, creating tension, curiosity, and mental engagement. People had to think, reflect, and even wrestle with their own understanding before answers were revealed. Silence also magnified the impact of his words. When he spoke, the timing mattered. A well-placed pause could emphasize a truth, highlight a consequence, or make a moral point unforgettable. For instance, when he confronted hypocrisy or injustice, a quiet moment before speaking gave weight to the following words, making them resonate far more deeply than constant explanation ever could. Another key dimension was personal reflection. After telling a parable or making a profound statement, Jesus often allowed silence to settle. This created space for listeners to internalize the lesson, to ask themselves, how does this apply to my life? Teaching isn't just about delivering content, it's about transformation. Silence encouraged that transformation by giving people the chance to engage actively with what they hear. Jesus also modeled patience through silence. He didn't need to force understanding or push people into immediate reactions. His calm presence, coupled with thoughtful pauses, taught that learning is a process, not a race. Reflection, contemplation, and discernment were as much part of his method as the words themselves. Finally, Silence allowed emotional depth, grief, hope, or could settle in before he spoke next. By letting moments breathe, he created emotional resonance, ensuring that his lessons weren't just heard, but felt. In essence, silence was an invisible instrument in Jesus' teaching, subtle, intentional, and profoundly effective. It made his words stick, his lessons linger, and his teachings alive in the hearts of his listeners for a lifetime. Timeless teacher, the enduring impact of Jesus' words. After exploring stories, questions, authority, empathy, repetition, contrast, and silence, we arrive at the heart of Jesus' teaching, its timeless power. His words were not simply lessons for his immediate audience. They were blueprints for living, designed to resonate across cultures, centuries, and generations. Jesus' genius as a teacher lay in the perfect harmony of method and message. Every parable, question, or command was carefully crafted to engage the mind, stir the heart, and inspire action. He didn't merely tell people what to think. He showed them how to see, feel, and choose rightly. This holistic approach transformed ordinary listeners into thoughtful, reflective, and morally aware individuals. His authority made people listen. His empathy made them trust. His stories made lessons memorable. His questions provoked thought. His repetition cemented understanding. His contrasts clarified choices. His pauses allowed reflection. Alone, each element was powerful. Together, they created a teaching style unparalleled in history. Even today, 2,000 years later, his words continue to resonate. People find guidance in his parables, inspiration in his questions, courage in his challenges, and comfort in his empathy. Teachers, leaders, and ordinary individuals alike study his methods, seeking to emulate the clarity, compassion, and transformative power he demonstrated. What makes Jesus' teaching enduring is not merely the content, it is the connection. He spoke to the mind, but he also spoke to the heart and soul. He understood human nature, acknowledged struggles, and provided practical yet profound wisdom. He didn't impose learning, he invited it. He didn't dictate, he illuminated. Ultimately, Jesus shows us that the greatest teaching transcends authority, entertainment, or even knowledge. It touches hearts, awakens conscience, and equips people to live with purpose, integrity, and love. His words are alive because they are rooted in truth, empathy, and divine insight. As we conclude this series, one truth is clear. Jesus wasn't just a teacher of his time. He is the teacher for all time. Every story, question, and pause holds a lesson that can still guide our decisions, shape our character, and inspire our lives. His words endure not because they are ancient, but because they are profoundly human and profoundly divine.